TV Corner.
Okay. Hi guys, welcome to long overdue Film Core TV Corner podcast. This week we're covering episodes 1 and 2 of HBO's new show, Lovecraft Country. With me I have Alex Kirschenbaum.
Hello Armani, happy to be here.
Okay, yeah, so there's been definitely a lot of buzz about this show, especially because it's coming from a newly crowned horror master, Jordan Peele. So really quick, just setting the scene. At the start, we're thrown right into the pages of a pulp story being read by our protagonist, Atticus Freeman, played by Jonathan Majors, who some of you might recognize from The Last Black Man in San Francisco. This role is super different from his role in that movie, so it's definitely nice to see him, working some range. Basically, he's on a cross-country bus trip to Chicago to look for his missing father, Montrose. Shout out to Montrose Beach. But the trip is cut short when the bus breaks down and forces Atticus and the only other black passenger to walk the rest of the way when they are denied passage on the backup ride. So that just sort of sets the tone for when we're in this segregated time in America where, you can argue that still this is happening, but where blacks are not afforded the same rights as our white counterparts. Atticus himself is actually a Korean War veteran, which is a big point of contention for people in his family, especially his father, who feels like, why should you fight for a country that doesn't fight for you? Which is a valid criticism in my book. Traveling to Chicago, he's going to meet his uncle George, who's the owner of a Negro travel company. So this is a nod to the Green Book, which is what African Americans would use to travel through questionable parts of the country and know where it was safe for them to get gas, get food, lodging, all those things. Because as we learn through the show, sort of navigating this territory can be pretty dangerous, especially with the implementation of things like sundown towns and rules where blacks aren't allowed to be out after dark. So that can obviously, really mess up your road trip if you can't be driving past 8 o'clock. Yeah, so George, being sort of a professional traveler, agrees to help Atticus find his father in a place that they believe to be called Artem, which is it seems to be an ambiguous spot on the map within Lovecraft Country. They are joined by their Atticus's childhood friend, old friend. I can't remember the exact date, but Letitia. She is an activist and photographer, and sort of is a roaming spirit. That sounds like she's a ghost. She's sort of one of those what is the term you're looking for? And she just sort of is always traveling around, spending money, bailing her activist friends out of jail. She didn't go to her own mother's funeral. So she's just sort of not really attached to any place, and was excited to go on this ride with Atticus and George.
Yeah, and she's hitching a ride with them to visit her brother and sort of covertly ask him for money.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's sort of what we understand from Letty's character, played by Journey Smollett, the sister of the infamous Jussie Smollett.
Moving right along.
I don't want to get into that story, but yeah, essentially she just is hitching rides to talk to her brother to get more money and to sort of, what else is she going to do? Right. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. But on their journey, it isn't long until trouble finds them as they are following their guidebook to a diner. The diner appears to be sort of outdated. It turns out that they ran the previous owner out of town, so now they aren't so welcoming to people of color. And they're basically chased out of the diner and saved by a mysterious silver car, which undoubtedly was going to play later in this series. Yeah, but it was pretty obvious that this was one of those moments where this character is going to show up later. And it's probably not going to be good. And we do find out later that all these suspicions were confirmed.
Right. Well, it turns out she's his distant cousin.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, they don't get to talk to her during this first interaction because they're just too happy to be getting away from these guys chasing them with shotguns. And unfortunately, that's when they get lost looking for the turnoff for Artem and are being faced with the conflict of being out after dark, after they are warned by the sheriff that that won't be tolerated.
Right, they're in a quote-unquote sundown town, which was a thing that, like I said before, I don't think I knew about.
Yeah, and I think it's actually just piggybacking on that. It's super important that like HBO is really highlighting these sort of things within our history, which I feel like do really get glossed over or sort of just like minimized, and how stressful it was to live like this, and how sort of incessant the the bigotry was during this time. I mean, in speaking on as far as like educating people, like a lot of people didn't really understand how horrible the Tulsa massacre was until it was like shown on Watchmen. So it is great that HBO is allowing a platform for us to keep educating people on these issues, and like, you know, just reminding them of like this wasn't actually that long ago.
Right, and they're incorporating it into sort of fantasy, action, horror type shows. You know, it makes you think even when you're watching a show that's ostensibly just for frivolous entertainment purposes. So it's cool that like it engages people at this level and educates people, even though it's also just sort of this fantastic entertainment with crazy Lovecraftian squid monster things.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, on that as well, I mean, even the fact that they're sort of like co-opting the story from Howard Lovecraft, who was, you know, the series is named after. He was a great pulp fiction writer, and essentially he was also like a huge racist. So it's Atticus acknowledges this with George and saying like, you know, accepting the flaws of people and still like appreciating their work, which is definitely hard to do. And I think a lot of people argue against that simultaneously. I think there is merit in definitely acknowledging like artistic endeavors, especially those that really have an impact on pop culture, like Lovecraft's writing. Like a lot of other horror writers, like Stephen King, have pulled from him. Obviously, this show is directly named after him, so you have to appreciate what he's done for the genre. But it is also important to not forget his other, like, you know, horrible values.
And it's based on a novel, which I have not read, called Lovecraft Country by a guy named Matt Ruff, that apparently tackles this exact content too. So it's not. So the novel baked in the whole idea of sort of reclaiming this racist, bigots, still intriguing mythology and recontextualizing it in a way that kind of, I don't know, gave the people that this guy hated more say in the mythology he created, which is, yeah, I agree. It's like a loaded thing. It's cool that they address it and try to like free the stories from the flaws of their creator, but also, yeah, like we had a conversation about this before, and you had mentioned that it felt weird that like was no one else available. Why is it this guy? You know.
It's definitely fair to acknowledge the creator of the Cthulhu mythos, but like, did it need to be named after him?
I can't say I've read a lot of him. I read From Beyond, a short story, and I've seen the movie From Beyond a zillion times, and I've seen Reanimator, the movie, a zillion times. But that's my only exposure to Lovecraft prior to this.
Catching back up with our group, as they are apprehended after dark in this sundown town, they are unlawfully marched into the woods to be questioned by the deputies and the sheriff, where they are then accused of a random string of robberies, which they obviously had nothing to do with, and they are about to either be, it seems to be murdered, but then a monster begins attacking the group. Luckily, Atticus and George are well versed in monster lore and able to figure out that these monsters are obviously vampires, and the key to their survival is to get back to the car, Woody, turn on the lights, and scare all the vampires away.
They're like vampiric squid monsters or something.
Yes.
Because they have like eyes all over their bodies, and they're kind of like sluggish.
Yeah, and then once one bites the sheriff, he also turns into one of them. So sort of like that vampire zombie transference of monster status.
Yeah.
So Letty runs to the car, manages to bring it back. They set up a flare system, so they seem to be sort of like outsmarting the vampires and are on their way to wait them out till dawn when there's a mysterious whistle in the distance and all the monsters get called away. I mean, so far, obviously someone's in control of them, and we don't know who. Cut to the next scene. Bloody Letty, Atticus, and George manage to walk the rest of the way to Artem, to the Braithwaite house, where the mysterious silver car that we saw earlier waits in the driveway. They are then greeted by a man at the door who says they've been waiting for them, which is, to me, always a sign to run. And they should have run. Since they've arrived to Artem, we know that part of the reason why Montrose sent them here is because he was speaking of some sort of birthright. And we learn more about that as they spend more time in the Braithwaite house. And the penultimate moment, we find out that Atticus is a descendant of the former owner of the house, but not by consensual means. Essentially, there was a slave, Hannah, who managed to escape the original fire, who was pregnant with Atticus's great relative. And this is why they were expecting him, is because all the Braithwaites are a part of a secret magical society, and they need Atticus for the Sons of Adam ceremony, which is to open a portal to Nirvana. Just as the gang figures out that their hosts have magical powers, they hatch a plan to escape with Atticus's missing father, Montrose. However, they're caught, and Atticus is forced to face his fate and participate in the ceremony.
Right, and that's all pretty unclear, in the episode. It's just they throw a zillion things at you, and it's condensed into this 1 hour-long episode instead of at least 2 episodes. They just throw all this information at you. They need this last descendant of the Braithwaites to open a portal to give them some sort of superpowers, unclear. And we know they've done it before, and it didn't work, and it burned down the estate last time. That the Atticus's great-great-grandmother escaped from, and now they're trying to do it again, but they think this time it's going to work for some reason, where it didn't last time. Unclear why.
Yeah, what I will say about the second episode, I feel like the first episode did a really good job of setting the stage, but the second one definitely moved pretty quickly. It almost felt like a season finale.
Right, and it's it pays off a lot of it kills off some villains and stuff, and it doesn't mean anything because it just introduced them. So, we don't care, really.
It doesn't feel like a win when the plan backfires. The ceremony backfires, and this causes the house to crumble, House of Usher style, thanks to the magical protection from Hannah, who was the escaped slave. And unfortunately, not all of our heroes make it out of the situation alive. So my prediction after seeing episode 1 was that Uncle George was not going to make it because he had a very emotional send-off with his wife. And looks like I was right.
That was one of those things where they kept focusing on him and his wife, and they had a phone call with him later. It was oh man, I can't wait to do this when we get back. You and I would do a Green Book tour of the country together when I come back. I'm so looking forward to my life after this. I'm really gonna slow down at work, etc., etc. Whenever a heroic older character says that, that's how you know they're in trouble.
Yeah, definitely. I as soon as they had that heart-to-heart, I was like, his days are numbered.
And that's another thing they talk about, too, that they just throw a zillion things at you. But it turns out Uncle George might not be Uncle George.
He might be Daddy George.
Might be Daddy George. We find out that there's a sequence where the Braithwaites put everybody under another hypnotic spell just to, fuck around with them before dinner. And Christina Braithwaite is sort of the main person, I guess. It's Abby Lee's the actress there, and again, she's Atticus's very distant cousin, and so she puts them all under a spell. Atticus sees a woman he killed during the Korean War in self-defense, and then Uncle George sees, I think it's Atticus's mom, and they talk about they sort of covertly talk about their affair, and then it's reiterated they had an affair. Maybe when Uncle George lays almost dying talking to Montrose, Atticus's ostensible dad, about the origins of Atticus and how they're not sure whose kid he is.
Yeah, which I think is definitely going to come up again. I think it's going to be hit Atticus extra hard because not only is he losing, who I think he already sort of considered Uncle George as more of like a father figure because his dad sort of seemed very absent and not like the best role model. So to learn that this is like your actual dad is like going to be definitely double the blow.
That's one of those things. I don't know. It's like it kind of reminds me of that Arrested Development subplot where George's twin brother Oscar might actually be the youngest Bluth kid's secret dad, and it's like a meaningless subplot. Like it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, yeah. I think that what makes it more meaningless too is just sort of like it's unclear where the show's going to go from here now. I mean, I saw the trailer for next week and it looks like each of these episodes are sort of going to be like self-contained for the most part, like to one or two episodes. So once we sort of like check off this monster genre, we're going to be headed right into the next. And it looks like next week's going to be more of like a haunted ghost type of situation, and it's going to be more Letty focused. So my one criticism is like I feel like there's still a lot of questions that we're going to have, and I don't know how they're going to pay it off in a way that makes sense in the next episode.
Yeah, I totally agree. It feels like the first episode really it felt like they had a lot of control of like the tone and the pace in a way that the second episode didn't. It felt more scatterbrained, but like they can still land a lot of the threads that they introduced. But yeah, can we trust them to do that? Because they just threw a lot of stuff at us. It was a little confusing, but yeah, they could. It could go in some interesting directions. It's just a question of if it will, or if it's going to keep world building with random stuff, and then sort of like introducing a bunch of like plot threads, and then resolving them quickly, so that you don't really have a lot of investment in the story, and then you're a bit like out of sorts trying to figure out what storylines matter, which ones don't, and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels a little bit like American Horror Story-esque, and the idea of like it being sort of like somewhat inconsequential camp elements, but I think it's also too soon to tell. Like I think seeing next week's episode is like where we're going to be able to see like how they cross genres and still tie in those threads across episodes. Any final predictions, thoughts, theories, feelings?
Well, this came up in conversation with my viewing buddies for episode 2, but Tony Goldwyn, weird casting choice for Samuel Braithwaite, who's the leader of the Braithwaite Sons of Adam sort of Freemasons type evil cult group. I don't know.
I don't know if you watched Scandal, but I was like, Fitz? Yeah. I was like, I don't know if you watched Scandal, but I was like, Fitz?
I know he's in it. I just think of him as like the duplicitous best friend in Ghost. Okay. But yeah, he's like the president in Scandal, right?
Yes, yeah. He's great in that role. I think it was a little. I don't think we got enough time with him. Like honestly, I think that's what it chalks up to. Like again, like I feel like he was never really given the chance to really be the full villain. So we knew that he was sort of like an antagonist, but it didn't feel like he did anything that threatening yet. I mean, I guess they when they apprehended them when they were escaping and they shot Letty, maybe that was sort of it. But I really feel like we should have gotten another episode with them. Like they should have cliff hung the Letty shooting to next week.
I totally agree. I think that's where they should have split it off.
We would have been mad. We would have been a little mad. But I think that like that would have been a better pacing for the episodes overall, and would have given us more time to be like actually invested in the face-off that was occurring between the two parties. But yeah, I mean, so that does worry me from like a writing standpoint. But I mean, it's only episode 2,
right? And that's the thing too is like okay, so they have these amazing witch powers that sort of compelled them to stay because basically what happens is the family escapes, they stop them with a witch barrier. Invisible force field thing on a bridge, and then they shoot Letty and Uncle George, and they say, you know, we can heal them, but you have to come with us, Atticus, and partake in this ceremony. And then the ceremony again is to like achieve nirvana. But what does that even mean? Like, what do they get out of it? They're already sort of pretty powerful wizard people. Like, I don't really understand their exact like actionable intentions?
I think it was along the lines of eternal youth.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's very Indiana Jones core, yeah.
It was, again, too fast. I think we didn't have time to build the lore, so we didn't have time to understand what the ceremony was. I did like the effect of, like, sort of like the grass and greenery coming through. It reminded me of that, the afterlife in Westworld, but the Valley of the Great Beyond. But it still was very obscure, like what they're trying to get to.
Yeah, so that's one of those things too, where you think about the Indiana Jones comparison, and then the main villain in Last Crusade, who's trying to get the Holy Grail and get eternal life, and he's this evil American in cahoots with the Nazis, and he'll do whatever he can to get eternal life, and that's it. That's all he wants. Very simple, very streamlined goal. And we find out that he's going to betray the Jones boys to achieve that goal. Like, and you get to know him pretty well over the course of this 2-hour movie, and I think that's all we need for Tony Goldwyn's character and his like family. I'm sure we're going to see the daughter again,
Christina.
So like maybe they'll develop that more. But yeah, it should have been more like movie length, where it's 2 episodes and they have like a cliffhanger with Letty getting shot, maybe even showing Uncle George getting shot too, and then cutting back to the estate and Atticus sort of getting ready to do this ceremony thing, and then we understand the stakes of the ceremony. Maybe get some flashbacks and stuff, set up the Braithwaite family a little bit more, etc., etc. But yeah, I don't know. So it's still developing, and we'll see how they land it. And I guess so. It's like the main people behind it are Jordan Peele, JJ Abrams, and then Misha Green, who's credited with like development of the show. She did a show called Underground for HBO that I haven't seen, and so it's interesting to see where they're going to go with it. I'm still like on board. I really like the first episode. This episode, not so much, but again, it depends on how they land it. So
I'm definitely interested in like seeing the next one, and like we'll just see where it goes from here.
Yeah, it's gonna bug me if I don't get the name of the guy that hires Indiana Jones in Indiana Jones and Last Crusade. So let's go through. Julian Glover playing Walter Donovan, evil American businessman who sends them out on the quest for the Holy Grail. But yeah, so like that was clearly the inspiration for this character. But like you really got a sense of him because they gave him
2 hours.
Like 2 hours to marinate. Yeah.
We got 15 minutes.
Right? Yeah, you can't just do that. Like, take a lesson from Spielberg. Like, draw it out a little bit. It's all there. Like, it's a cool setup. So I'm interested to read the book, I think, kind of, and see what how that was tackled there in the Matt Ruff novel.
Yeah, well, definitely. Well, I'm looking forward to hopping on this next week. Thank you so much, Alex, and we'll see you guys for the next one.
Thanks, Armani. See you guys next time.
TV Corner.